Welcome to the BMC Remedyforce Winter 18 Early Access Program. My name is John Fulton and I'm one of the product managers for BMC Remedyforce. Today's session will cover a number of the key enhancements that are targeted around the CMDB within Winter 18. Please be aware that what we are showing you today is covering future product which is under NDA and our safe harbor statement applies. There are 4 key enhancements around the CMDB that we will cover in today's session. The first one being expanded list view customization around the Relationship tab. Prior to Winter 18, the columns that appear in the Relationship tab are fixed. We are now leveraging the list view customization capability under Administration and have added a new record to allow you as the administrator to configure the columns that appear within the Relationship tab. The second item is around a configurable filter on active and inactive records, giving you, the user, the ability to define the default records that appear when viewing the CMDB console, the Relationship tab, and also the CMDB Explorer. You now have the ability to define by default whether you want to see only active records or if you want to see all records, which would include inactive records. The third enhancement is around multiple instance editor, and we've made a number of key enhancements, the big one being a new feature around mass change. So we now give you the ability to make it easy to make a global change across multiple records in just a few simple steps. We've also made some usability and navigation improvements. And then the third enhancement is around the rule-based asset class. Specifically, we've added the support for OR statements, so you can add more sophisticated rules around what appears in your rule-based asset classes, and we'll go through a few examples in today's session. Please note that there is a separate video around the integration enhancements that are targeted in Winter 18 between the Remedyforce CMDB and BMC Discovery. Let's get started. The first item is around the expanded list view customization of the Relationship tab. As mentioned, what we've done is we've added under the administration the ability for you to identify which fields and columns appear. And in a demonstration later in the session, I'll walk through those steps and what the administrative list view customization page looks like. But again, the simple point here is that you now have the ability as the administrator to control which columns appear in the Relationship tab. The second item is around configurable filter on active and inactive records. And the key here is that we've added a new default setting, which you can see in the screenshot below, where there's a new flag marked as deleted, which denotes whether a record is active or inactive. So it's in essence a soft delete of the record. It's still in there, it's just that we can now filter, or we can always filter on those records. So when you log into the CMDB, when you upgrade to Winter 18, by default, this new option will be unchecked, meaning that when you log in, you will only see active records. If you want to revert back to the ability to see all records, you can simply go in and select this checkbox, and it will actually be saved as a cookie. So for each user, they have the ability to determine what their preferred default settings are and save those so that the next time they log in, they will see those identified records. This capability is also exposed within the Relationship tab. So there's also another checkbox on the Relationship tab. So if you only want to see active records, for example, active relationships, you have the ability to do that. The other important note here regarding inactive and active records and relationships is if you have an inactive record linked via a relationship to an active record, that relationship will not appear just because the associated record is no longer active. And again, we'll walk through a few demos here later in the session to give you a understanding of the specific behavior. The third item is the multiple instance editor enhancements. And as I mentioned, the big enhancement here is around the addition of a mass change capability. So in the screenshot, what you'll see, two key things. On the left-hand side, you'll see checkboxes giving you the ability to select all rows or multiple rows or a subset of rows. And then along the top, there's a new header where if you select one or multiple rows, this new header appears, and it gives you the ability to select a value. So in the case here, I've selected CI status. So what I could do is I could select a value from CI status, and then based on the rows that I've selected, I could select apply or save, and it will apply that value across multiple rows. The other point to make is in the upper right hand corner, we've added a new page control where you can see the number of records per page and also the total number of records, so it gives you that perspective. This is something that we are looking to add to the main CMDB console, but due to complexity and the challenges, we were not able to add that to the Winter 18 release, but it is something that we will consider in a future release. A few other things to note here. There is a limitation on the number of records that can be updated. In the case where you are not using reconciliation and reconciliation is turned off, you can update up to 200 records at one time. If you do have reconciliation on, you are currently limited to updating 20 records at a time. It's something, again, we're looking at as a future enhancement down the road, but there are some challenges in supporting additional records when reconciliation is on, so we will consider that as an enhancement down the road. As mentioned, there are some usability improvements. The page controls I've already mentioned. We've locked the headers when scrolling vertically, so when you're scrolling up and down, the headers will remain in your view. And then also the same idea when scrolling horizontally, when you're scrolling left or right, the instance name, that column on the far left, will remain locked. So no matter how far you scroll over, you'll still know which record you're on. And the final item in this session is around rule-based asset class improvements. What we've done is, prior to this release, we only supported AND statements when defining rule-based asset classes. And in this release that we're targeting Winter 18, we're adding the support for OR. There's a couple reasons we did this. Number one is for any customers that are using agent list discovery, Remedyforce agent list discovery, Premium or Premium Plus or BCM, there are some devices that are discovered as a workstation and not a desktop. So for those that have the existing desktop rule-based asset class, you can now add an OR statement and say that if there are records that have a primary capability of workstation, they can also appear in the desktop class. Some customers may choose to leverage a new class that we're adding, which is a workstation class. It just depends on how you're currently using it and if you want to do any consolidation, but it gives you more flexibility as a key point. This concludes the PowerPoint session, so now I'm going to jump over to a live demo and walk through all 4 key enhancements. Again, please note that there is a whole separate session on the integration enhancements between the Remedyforce CMDB and BMC Discovery. I encourage you to take a look at that. But now let's jump into a live demo of these enhancements that we've just covered. Okay, so let's first take a look at list view customization. I'm going to navigate to list view customization under administration from the CMDB grouping. And what you'll see now is there's a base relationship object or record listed here. So this is new by default in Winter 18. And if I scroll down, I can see the default values that appear. But you also see available fields, and as I mentioned, there's a base relationship object, which are all the details associated to that relationship, and then there's the base element, which would list all the additional elements, or all the additional values associated with that record, CI or asset. So in this case here, maybe I want to add, well, actually before I take a look here, if I go to a record here and just take a look at what it looks like right now, if I go to the relationship tab, you'll see sort of the default values. Okay. One thing to point out too is, just to be a little bit more consistent, we added a hyperlink to the relationship name. So instead of always having to double click, which you can do, now you can just click on the hyperlink to drill into the relationship details, or if you click on the associated instance, it will drill into that CI or asset record from within the CMDB here. So let's go back to administration and say I want to add a has impact, so I want to see additional details on the relationship. and I want to add that next to instance name. And then maybe I also want to see, last modified date on the actual associated record. So I'm going to add that and keep that at the end here and save those settings. So we save those settings. I go back here and let me just refresh the screen by exiting and going back into the record. And you will now see the has impact and last modified date columns. Now, one thing to note that some customers may not be aware of, that's a nice little feature here, is for has impact you'll see that the column is much wider than it needs to be, and it's either going to be a yes no value. So what I can do is I can go to the has impact field here and I can change the pixels. Say we just cut it down from 150 to 75. I save that. Now if I go back here, let me again just refresh the screen. It's just a nice little trick here to compress the white space, and you can see here now has impact is down to about half the size. Okay, now let's take a look at active and inactive records. And as I mentioned, there's an option here under the views icon to include marked as deleted records. So right now, because this is unchecked, I'm by default only viewing active records. But if I check this, it will now filter and show me all records. And I think in my case here, I just don't have a lot of or any other inactive records, but it will save those values so you can control what's active or inactive. Now if I take a look at the relationship tab with that same concept here, you'll see again there's the views option, and I have the option here to include marked as deleted, so I can include active or inactive records. If we go into one of these relationships, right now I'm only viewing active records, so if I go into one of these relationships and I decide I want to mark it as deleted, I'm going to say it's an inactive relationship. I'm going to save this, and I go back to my view. You'll see it's only going to show that one relationship. And again, keep in mind the other nuance to this logic is, in this case here, I could have an active relationship, but if I go here and I click on this cluster, this associated record, and if I make it inactive and I save it and I go back to relationships, I just have to refresh the screen here, you won't see that record. So even though the relationship is active, if the associated record is inactive, it will not appear here. So again, some improvements, updates on the configurability of what you can view and not view by default. The same logic also applies in the CMDB Explorer. All right, the third item that I want to take a quick look at is around the multiple instance editor, which is available on the CMDB console. Depending on the search results, you click on the multiple instance editor, it's going to launch this spreadsheet type of mode, and the enhancements are, again, the ability to select multiple records. And you'll see when I selected more than one record here, I selected all records. With this row appearing, now I can add values. So for example, if I want to say the reconciliation date, the reconcile date is today's date, and I want to apply it to all, I can select that and hit all. If I want to change the primary or the stage, for example, something simple here, I want to change the stage to tested. Again, I could hit that, hit save, and it will update all these records. I hit save. It's going to tell me how many records are going to be updated. In this case here, I just have 23 records in my sample database, so not an extensive list. And I don't have reconciliation on, which allows me to go beyond the 20 records. And if I hit OK, it will apply, in this case, tested and the reconciliation date of today's date to all my records. And you'll notice too, although I had to shrink my screen here, if I scroll left or right, it does lock column headings. And because of this recording tool that I'm using, I had to make my screen really small, but it does also lock the column headings when you scroll up and down. You also have the ability to change the page numbers, page count, record count on each page. So if I want to increase this to 200, have that ability. Again, in my sample data, I just have 23 records, so going above 25 doesn't really make any changes. But Again, if you have a lot of records, it does give you a nice ability. And we are also looking at adding this kind of capability to the CMDB console main page in a future release. And then the last area to take a look at is under rule-based asset classes. So if I navigate back to the CMDB to my classes and I take a look at a class record, I'm actually going to go to my asset classes and I'm going to look at an existing rule-based asset class. We're going to look at desktop, for example. I now have the ability to go in and add additional capabilities. If you take a look at this desktop class, you can see I've added a condition down below here where the primary capability is either desktop or it equals workstation. Before I couldn't do this. I was forced to create two separate rule-based asset classes, but now with the OR statement that's supported, I have the ability to add additional conditions. And again, this is a common case where if you want to add multiple types of records into a single class based on the same field, but you want to use different values within that same field, that OR statement is a nice feature to have. This concludes the session around the key CMDB enhancements targeted for Winter 18. I hope this was informative. Again, please note that there is a separate session on the integration enhancements between the Remedyforce CMDB and BMC Discovery. I'd encourage you to take a look at that. That's it, and have a great day.